Hi, everybody. So, this intro is to really just talk about a few topics. And so, feel free to pause and take any notes that you need to. I strongly suggest it. And so, let's first of all, everyone knows what a zero is. But let's talk about what a zero is. Like, if I say find the zeros on this graph, just this picture. What we're talking about is the x-intercepts. And I know that sounds like interesting, and maybe it isn't interesting, but it is where y equals 0. So I want to just make that clear a little bit. Y equals 0 all along this line meaning the y-axis. And that's why we talk about these zeros. So let me just get rid of this part so that way we can clearly see what I'm talking about. So we have a 0 right here, and this 0 is -2 comma 0, and this 0 over here is 2 comma 0. And we'll talk about the applied, where it is applied. But essentially, so based on, let's clarify. These are the zeros. So that means that, so a zero is also called the following thing. So in this unit, if I say find the zeros of your function, I'm talking about the x-intercepts. If I say solve a quadratic, that means to algebraically solve the quadratic. So for example, algebraically would mean in this equation y equals x squared minus 4, because y equals 0 along the x-axis, we would actually set y equal to 0 for all of these equations. That's how we algebraically solve. So here we have it, and I'll go ahead and solve it for everybody. So we're going to add 4 on both sides because we're really trying to get x by itself. And we have 4 equal to x squared. And now we're going to square root. So square root it. And now we have plus or minus 2 equals x. We covered this in EK 1 and 2, that when you square root a number, it's going to have a plus or minus 2, which is why we have a 2 and then a -2. That is because if I plug in -2 squared into the equation x squared minus 4, this will be 4 minus 4, which will give me 0, so it works. And then if I plug in +2 squared minus 4, this is just plugging in +2, I still will get 4 minus 4. And it has to do with when you square, you're multiplying that number by itself twice. So if it says -3 squared, that is -3 times -3, which becomes a positive. And that is why we have the plus or minus. And that is this plus or minus means that x equals -2 and x equals +2. It's just something you will have to remember. So to clarify, to basically just go review, I guess I should say, we have first that with the sunglasses, that 0 is an x-intercept, and solving a quadratic is finding those x-intercepts algebraically. How to find those things algebraically is we set it equal to 0 and go through the motions, meaning getting x by itself. And in this case, it was fairly straightforward. We only had a number to deal with. But as you were aware when we did the lessons, it won't always be straightforward. We have this plus or minus thing going on, which is when you square something on both sides, you will have this plus or minus that you have to memorize. And that's because when you square something, it equals a positive. When you square a negative, it equals a positive. Okay, so at this point, if you haven't written anything down, I strongly suggest pausing and taking these notes. And before I go into example 2, which is again solving zeros and looking at the zeros and the relationship on the equation. Okay? This is example 2. And in this example, we are going to explore this example, x minus 3 and x plus 2. Feel free to write this down now or later. Either one works. And again, I'm going to talk about the zeros first. So we have a 0 here at -2, at x equals -2, and x equals 3. We actually went over this almost 2 weeks ago, where we explored, meaning we looked at different graphs, and then you created these equations. And basically what everybody came up to is that if we had a function at x equals -2, we would have a +2 here on this side. We have an x plus 2. But many of you didn't really understand why. And so at this point, I'm going to show you why, and why factored form is so powerful and why you really have to know how to do it. It's because it shows your x-intercepts very, very clearly. And again, here, look, we have x equals 3, and then we have a -3 on the left side that I will be putting in pink. So let's just kind of explore this. If I plug in x equals 3 to my equation, we're going to get y equals, and I'll plug in 3 really quickly into these empty spaces, and you can do this too. We get 3 minus 3, which is 0, times 3 plus 2. So let's just kind of clean this up a little bit. This is 0 in parentheses times 5, which equals 0. So it isn't that the -3 is the x-intercept. It's that when we plug in the +3, the x equals +3, it sets one of the parentheses to 0. So we plug it in, we get 0. And you're going to see the same phenomenon happen, meaning phenomenon is the same thing basically happening when I plug in the next one. So we have y equals, and here's the blank space for the x, -3, and then another blank space, +2. But when we plug in x equals -2, you guys are going to see that -2 minus 3 is -5, but -2 plus 2 is 0. And anything times 0 equals 0. 5 times 0 equals 0. 4 times 0 equals 0. And that's what you guys need to remember. So this point over here with the blue, we plug in -2, we get 0 out. In pink, we plugged in 3, and we got 0 out. So that's 3, 0, which is here. So this is the 3, 0, and then that 2, 0 is there. If you have any questions at this point, I really recommend writing it down. And I'm just going to do a quick overview. Please skip the overview if you don't need it. But I strongly suggest, if this is where you're pausing to write, feel free to pause and write. Go back. So again, factored form shows your x-intercepts. It's why it's so important, and it's just why you have to know how to factor before we start solving them. We have y equals x minus 3 times x plus 2. Therefore, -2 is going to set the right side to 0, which you will see below, -2 plus 2. And on the left, the x minus 3, a +3 will set the left side of the equation to 0. Setting means when we plug in 3, we get 0 out. And again, you will see that point 3, 0. Thank you. This is the end of this intro, which is just going over factoring, why factored form is important, and how they relate to the x-intercepts and solutions.